Okay, so the active learning strategy that I have been working on this week is reflection. I decided to do a recorded voiceover PowerPoint because this is an assignment that I ask my students to do a lot. But I will warn you that it's a very boring PowerPoint because I didn't put any pictures on it or graphs or anything because I didn't want to worry about having to deal with the accessibility part of that. So my apologies. So I actually decided to start with this question I believe it was number 3, but I think it was fitting because it's asking the reflection part of it, right? So why did I choose this strategy? So part of my teaching philosophy really revolves around metacognition because I like to foster what we call in composition TFT, or teaching for transfer. And so we really believe that reflection is, a really critical component to facilitating metacognition. But I've been working on our first year Welcome to College course that everybody has been taking and that we have several instructors teaching. And I've been wondering if we were using the reflection effectively in that class because we're using it so often. And I almost feel like it's becoming cliche because instead of asking critical questions, we're saying there's a lot of reflect on this, reflect on that. So I wanted to look into it a little further. So what are the tenets of this strategy? So really the main ideas are that reflection allows for feedback for instructional purposes, right? So as the instructors, when students are doing a lot of reflection, it allows you to get a better understanding. Is there something that you didn't quite teach enough or you didn't cover enough? Is there something that the students aren't grasping that you're hoping that they will? Of course, as instructors also, it allows for course adaptations. You learn, what you can do better in the future and what you can do to make the class work better. But then, of course, most importantly, it tracks individual experiences, right? So it allows students to take authority in their own learning. It allows them the opportunity to connect to their prior knowledge. It also allows them to make connections that they see fitting for their own future or for their own circumstances that they're in. How does it work in online classes? Which I was actually pretty surprised that the literature was saying that arguably reflection actually works better in online modality than in the face-to-face courses. And that's because especially asynchronous class, right? So the asynchronous classes allow the students to have more time to do reflection before they have to write about it and before they have to share it. So that time allows it to actually work more productively. It also helps build community dynamics, right? So if you want a class where they're actually working well together and they're actually bouncing ideas off of each other, having reflection helps build that community. And I also thought that it was important to note that in the research that I did, it said that it works well in both traditional online courses and non-traditional courses that have a lot of adult learners, ELL learners, that kind of thing. What subject or content is this most applicable to? My question in response to that question is, what isn't it applicable to, right? There's all different kinds of reflection, and so no matter what your content is or no matter what your subject is, if you're having students reflect on that content, they're more likely to transfer that knowledge in the future. So that's the ultimate goal, in my opinion. So gaps in the strategy. So I have to admit that I read a handful of sources. So is this gap in the strategy biased and perhaps unfounded? Yes. But the one thing that I didn't come across in the few articles that I read was the level of mastery, right? So when I originally, my inquiry going into looking at reflection was essentially, how guided do the questions need to be, right? Can you just say, reflect on the activity we did and still expect that high level of reflection? Does the mastery matter, right? So can we say something broad like reflect on this to grad students where we can't say that to freshmen because they need more scaffolding to answer that with that high level? I still don't know. More research to come. So how could we adopt reflection in our own courses? There are several different things you can do, right? So group collaboration projects. So when students are working together in group collaboration, they have different viewpoints and challenges, and those different viewpoints and challenges that they're working with prompt them to reflect on themselves, right? And reflect on their own biases, reflect on the way that they learn, that kind of stuff. Thought-provoking questions, right? So that's what I was just talking about with like guided questions, right? Getting them to think beyond the textbook, getting them to think beyond what their own beliefs already are. Encourage learner-generated e-learning blogs, right? Have the students create their own space where they can do reflection. Mind maps, right? So the mind maps for me didn't work as well as perhaps I would hope they did when we did this earlier in the class. But I'm thinking if you use mind maps, at the beginning of the unit and then at the end of the unit, you can use it as sort of reflection for both the students and for the instructors to say, did they gain the knowledge that we were hoping they did throughout that process? And hopefully the students will also see, wow, I learned a lot here since the beginning when we started. Self-assessment, right? Having the students do their own assessment. Asking students to summarize their learning experience, right? Which will help them absorb their key takeaways, improve their comprehension, and allow them to bring in that real-world application. Now, I think that's really what I was thinking when I was thinking about how to get them to transfer that knowledge, being able for them to say back to me in their own words and their own understanding what it is that they learned and how they're going to use it. Incorporate real-world activities like case studies, interactive simulations, role play. The role play one I thought was really interesting, thinking about, asking your students to respond to a discussion question, but give them a different role than they already play. So, if they're a woman, ask them to identify as a male, and how would they answer those questions differently. Something as simple as that, I think, is probably the easiest way to incorporate that real-world activity kind of thing. And then finally, encourage them to challenge their own assumptions, right? So give them target questions to do that. Potential challenges. Reflection is really time consuming, and you need buy-in for them to really use it to the way that we hope that they do, and that they're producing that high level kind of reflection. Especially in online courses, it's important that you create a safe environment like we have in this class, right? That you feel okay to put yourself out there and take those risks, especially with reflection, because you don't want to feel like you're being judged, or you don't want to feel like you're going to be alienated in some way. So it's important that you build a community to be able to foster those good conversations. And then, of course, also a challenge is that you're going to end up with that lower level reflection, right? That you're going to end up with, something that's not actually going to foster transfer, right? Something that's just going to be like, okay, they just regurgitating back to me what we did, but not what they're taking from it. And again, I think the guided questions help move that forward. So I think really what I took from all of this was that I went into it with this question being like, do they need guided questions? And the answer is yes, they do. Here's my references. Thanks for watching.